So over the course of about 4 years running a YouTube channel where I'm working on both a modern fuel-injected bike and a vintage custom-built bike, I have been asked many times how to find this part or that part. In this video, I want to go through my process for finding parts, and especially those hard-to-find parts. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. Happy to be putting on my new Motorcycle Men podcast sticker. Thank you to Ted for the awesome sticker for my toolbox. If you guys didn't catch me on the Motorcycle Men podcast, we had a really good conversation about the building of a custom bike and my new book, Creating Mr. Corton. Mr. Corton, of course, being my GS550 Cafe Racer. That's the name I have given it because of this guy, my old industrial arts teacher. You can find the book on Amazon or a link through urbanmonktv.com. Happy to be back with you guys, doing another video here on Urban Monk TV. Been busy working on a short film to be kind of the capstone to the GS550 build, or the Mr. Corton build as it's called now. And the premiere of that short film is coming up in a couple weeks from today. That is May 23rd. It's going to be at 7 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, which is 10 a.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. in London. So figure out, your time from there. So over the years of working on a couple of different bikes here, and then of course bikes prior to me starting Urban Monk TV, the channel, I have had a lot of people comment saying, hey, where did you find camshafts for your 1978 GS550? Or where did you find that LED brake light and turn signal switch? Or where did you find your gauges? So the questions I get a lot of them. And I try to help everybody. And the only time I find that I don't respond to a question is when YouTube, for some reason or another, doesn't tell me or alert me on my phone that someone has left a comment. And I don't know why it's kind of hit or miss on that. So if you're someone who posted a comment or a question and a long period of time went by before I responded, I apologize. That was because I didn't know your comment was there. If I know it's there, I tend to respond right away if I can, or within a day or so. It's kind of what I want to do. I want to be helpful to you guys out there who are either just trying to get a bike built, or especially to those guys who are new to all of this and want to get into the joy of working on and wrenching on old motorcycles, or even just new motorcycles, and get into motorcycling, but get into also caring for and maintaining them. I have found just a huge amount of joy in my life over decades from exactly that, and I want to share that. So I want to be of service and help. That's the whole point of this. How do I find parts? I guess we'll split this up into two separate halves. Vintage and what I'll call modern. So vintage, I guess, is anything maybe over 30 years old, something with a carburetor, something before ethanol blended fuels, something perhaps with a kickstart, and everything modern will be computer controlled, fuel injected Uh, we'll just call it that. So on either of the two bikes, the first place I like to start is the factory parts breakout, and I will tend to find those on just about any factory dealer website. I tend to go to Suzuki Parts House for either of my Suzukis. There's also Honda Parts House and Kawasaki Parts House, and they're all owned by a company called Babbitt's, and they have those breakouts. But you can also go to your local Honda dealer or your local Yamaha dealer, and you click on parts, and you'll find that the parts breakout is there. So right there is where I start 99% of the time to look for something that I know is stock OEM original equipment. With that, I get the correct terminology for that part. You know, very often I'll call the top of the engine, that cover that goes down over the tappets and the cams, I'll call it a valve cover. That's coming over from my automotive background side, but rarely does a motorcycle parts breakout call that a valve cover. They'll call it a tappet cover, or they'll call it a cylinder head cover or something. And when you're looking for parts, you want to be searching for the correct terminology. And so that's the first thing I do is get the right verbiage for the part I'm looking for. Because frankly, the technical writers at these companies can pick just about whatever they want to call these parts when they're setting all of this up. The other thing that I'm looking for is the OEM, or the manufacturer's part number for this. And why is that? Because very often I'm not buying it from those dealers. And I don't want to say I never do. I do. I've bought plenty of parts from Babbitt's and Suzuki Parts House, and I'm not specifically recommending them. I just happen to use them. If I have that part number, then when I go to other sources, my search includes that part number. Because here's a thing I've learned in my experience over the years, is that if I go to another source that I use a lot, like Google or eBay, and I put in camshafts, well, that's a bad example. I put in spark plugs for a 1978 Suzuki GS 550. I will get the correct OEM spark plug, which is a B8ES, but I'll also get other options that some seller has decided, well, it'll work in there, but it isn't necessarily the right choice. It's not the wrongest choice, but if I want stock OEM, then I gotta have that part number in my search. And when I keep that part number as part of my search, and very often I'll just search the part number. I don't even put the name or description of the part in. I put in the part number into eBay, and I'll get those parts. I'll get stock OEM, some old inventory that's been sitting on somebody's shelf for 45 years will still be there under that part number. But then I'll also get results from aftermarket manufacturers who, when they decide to make, say, a sprocket, rear sprocket for a motorcycle, even though it isn't the OEM spec part, they'll still use or associate that part number in the description somewhere. So my search will bring up both results, and I have then choices. So another good example of this is these contact points for the GS 550. I went into the OEM parts breakout and found these, and if I want the Suzuki parts, $88.16 per side. So, with shipping, I'm at, let's call it $200, not quite, just for contact points. But I took that part number and put it into eBay, and not only did some OEM parts come up that were really expensive, but some cheap ones came up too, and I ended up with a set of contact points that are made in China, but they've gotten me 225 miles so far without any issue and not putting me on the side of the road. And you know, they're holding up okay. Do I expect them to last as long as OEM? No, but for $200, these ones made in China were $8 a side. So I can buy a lot of sets of those for $200. That was another example of how just using the part number helped me find an aftermarket solution. Another example is on my modern bike, the V-Strom. I lost the little rubber covers that go between the heel of your boot and the swing arm bolt against the frame of the bike. And so I plugged in that OEM part number, and what I found, someone out there, if I recall correctly, I got these from Greece, is machining their own metal powder coated cover and cutting the term V-Strom in kind of a fun script that matches the V-Strom font logo here. And they provide a really good 3M adhesive for putting them on, and I think they're cool. So, you know, I found something like that when I was looking for the rubber OEM that was, you know, more this material. Speaking specifically to the Suzuki GS550, maybe not entirely specifically to, a couple of parts that I had a difficult time finding for that 40-plus-year-old motorcycle was piston rings and an intake boots, the rubber kind of like little intake manifolds between the carburetor and the cylinder head. And the rubber on those, after 40 years, gets really hard and cracks. And then once you've got cracks, you've got leaks, and the engine doesn't run right. What I did is the same process I've described. Go in, find the stock part number, and then I plugged that into eBay. And this is the critical thing. When I'm in eBay, I take a look at who the seller is. You know, they'll have their name, and it's often something kind of strange. But in this particular case, I came across a seller called Cruisin' Image, and it was spelled oddly. And they had those intake boots, and at a pretty reasonable price. They're not Suzuki manufacturer, they are an aftermarket boot. Somebody is recreating these. But then once I looked at Cruisin' Image, I took and did a Google search with that and found that this company is in Japan and has their own website and has a whole bunch of old vintage motorcycle parts that you just can't get your hands on anymore. And I also found gaskets, hard to find gaskets, carburetor parts, and I found those piston rings through them and at good prices. And so for me, that was a big score. Because I was trying to build that bike on a budget, and aftermarket manufacturers like that exist out there, and if you don't find them by word of mouth, that's another way to locate them, is just pay attention to who you're buying from on eBay, because you're not buying it from eBay. eBay's just this middleman that provides the platform for all the selling. The sellers oftentimes will have a different website that you can buy directly from them, and I've been really happy with this Cruisin' Image company that I came across. On the downside of that, I have had some bad experiences over the course of 3+ years of building Mr. Corton, and had some sellers sell me something and then they never shipped it, or they sent something that was just junk. I was able, every time, going through eBay's process of make sure you communicate through eBay always with the sellers, and because eBay's keeping a record of that conversation. And I won't get into the process of how to do returns or get refunds, but if you follow eBay's process and work in eBay, I have gotten my money refunded every time, and I've never been out anything but a little bit of some hassle factor just dealing with it. It's been rare. Most of the time I have a really good experience on eBay. So that's another way I find parts. Camshafts. I needed discontinued camshafts, and again I went to the internet and did some Google searching. I believe I found my way back to eBay on those camshafts, and here it was important that I had not only the correct part number from the parts breakout, but also that I had the correct specifications from the service manual for whether or not a part is worn. So service manual is key to finding parts sometimes. In the case of the camshafts, there is no aftermarket manufacturer. There is only Suzuki, and Suzuki has stopped making them. So I am now chasing old inventory or parts that have been taken off of a bike that was wrecked or whatever, and one of these disassemblers who parts out bikes is selling. But when you're buying from someone like that, you need to know that you're getting something that's within service spec. So know your service specs. In this case, I went to the Suzuki service manual for my year and model, the GS550, and I knew what all the specifications were for the lobes on the camshafts. And so then when I found those camshafts, I found multiple sets of them for sale on eBay. I contacted each of those sellers and said, can you give me the measurement, from here to here on the lobes, and what is it? And so I reached out to 3 sellers, one of which got back to me, only one. So the 2 that did not get back to me, of course I did not buy the camshafts from them because I would have been rolling the dice. And why did I have the seller communicate through eBay to me what that measurement was? Because I'm putting them on record, for their word, that when they give me a measurement, when it arrives, then I have a foot to stand on when I measure it. If it's wrong, I can go back through the eBay process I just mentioned and get my money back and get these things returned. In this case, the one seller that responded to me with the measurements gave me a measurement that was within spec, and mine were out of spec. They were worn completely. And part came, measured it, sure enough, that seller was honest, and those are the cams that are running in the bike now, and they work great. I kept the old cams because if you simply cannot find a part in a case like that, there are people out there that can, machine material onto those lobes, essentially add material, harden it, and then remachine it to spec and build you a new camshaft. And they can give you a little bit more lift if you want and make it more high performance, that kind of thing. So those resources are still out there. You got to know where to look for them. So that has been a lot of description of the process for finding stock parts. But what about those aftermarket parts? Here you just got to know what you want. Now, like in the case of the speedometer and tachometer for Mr. Corton, there's a lot of options. Do I want something that's electronic and I have to replace the sending unit on the front wheel to get wheel speed, or do I need to hook it up to the ignition system in the case of a tachometer and program in this is a 4-cylinder, so it knows how many RPMs the engine is doing via just an electronic pulse? Or do I want a mechanical system like what was on the bike originally, just not OEM? That's what I went with. I went with the little 2.5-inch mini gauges. I think they're cool. They are a completely aftermarket part, and they're available more than one place. A very good source for this stuff would be Dime City Cycles. Dime City Cycles has a lot of hard to find parts. I also get parts from Radix, especially if I'm working with a Honda, like a GL or a, well, I got CX500 parts, but I was working on a CB900 and found that the little gasket for the inside of the fuel petcock was the same on that CB900 as it was for a Goldwing, and even Radix didn't know that. But I worked with them I just said, hey, will you guys take this thing back if it's wrong? It sure looks like the same part. Sometimes you just get down to, the picture looks right. And, but I got them to say, yeah, give it a try. And, if you find out it works, then Radix knows that it works now for that other model, and they can use that information to sell it to CB900 owners. And frankly, it's probably the same for the CB750 and the CB1000, that kind of thing. So there I wasn't at risk. They were going to take it back, and I bought the thing and it worked great. But Radix is same parent organization as Dime City Cycles, reputable company, selling good stuff and backing it up with good service. So I'll recommend them. No compensation or endorsement there. I just have bought parts from them. Back to the gauges. So the gauges, you got to be careful that the internal math on the tachometer is working with your bike. If you have a V-twin with a mechanical sending cable to the tachometer, it's a certain number of revolutions of that camshaft equals 1 revolution of the crankshaft. And which one are you supposed to have? In the case of a lot of Japanese 4-cylinders, it's a 4-to-1 ratio for those tachometers. So I knew I needed a 4-to-1. How did I do that? I went in with a wrench and turned the crankshaft 1 revolution while counting how many times the little thing spun inside of the camshaft sender at the top of the engine. And that was simple to figure out. I just, 1 turn of the crank equals how many turns of that little sending unit. Visually figured that out. And for other parts like LED bulbs or wiring or whatever, I have to be honest, most of the time I end up going to eBay or Amazon. Amazon, I'm a Prime member, things come fast. That's fun. eBay, things tend to come slower, especially when I'm ordering them directly from China. But what I love about it is, even though the stuff takes a month to get here, or sometimes even longer, I'm in the middle of a build project. What's the hurry? There's always something else I can be working on. And when those parts come from China, man, are they inexpensive. Really low-cost way to get the job done. And since a lot of the things we buy are manufactured in China anyways, I'm not really sacrificing any quality buying it directly from them. And I still have eBay's, they got my back when it comes to returns if I'm following their process. It's key, follow their process. Tools. Tools is another thing where if you go to your service manual, you'll find, like in the case of this tappet wrench that will press the tappet bucket down to loosen up the tension between the camshaft and that tappet shim, so you can get the shim out, figure out what size it is, and put the correct one in there if you're doing an adjustment. You can buy these tools still directly from the manufacturers, and they're quite expensive. But there are aftermarket manufacturers that make perfectly good tools. This one's from Motion Pro. It's specifically for Suzuki. I also have one specifically, Motion Pro again. This one is specifically for Honda. So you can get things like that. They're cheaper than the manufacturer ones. They work great. Motion Pro is a good company, and I've worked directly with them on getting a custom cable made. So there's another part we can talk about. Sometimes you're modifying your bike so much that the OEM part just isn't going to work anymore. In the case of a cable, it's too long, you want it shorter. I tried shortening cables. I ended up taking that video down because the amount of resistance from the clutch mechanism on this bike is so great that I kept popping the ferrule off the end that I kept trying to connect. And so I, uncle, let me have somebody that really knows how to build these things build it. And Motion Pro did a great job of getting me a solid cable that's been treating me well so far. I mean, I've only got 200 miles on the bike, but if it hasn't broken yet, why would it if I maintain it up to now? And that's it. I got to lube those cables and take care of them properly, and they'll serve me for a long, long time. Simple parts like brake pads you can get off of eBay or Amazon. Here you want to know what you're looking for. You want to know the difference between sintered pads or semi-metallic pads or just straight up organic pads. I went with sintereds here, but this is another case where I used the stock part number and searched that OEM part number, and the aftermarket options come up along with that. And so I tried this brand out, and they've been working for me. I've had guys comment and say, oh, I tried those and the pad slipped off the backing material. I had a nightmare, left me on the side of the road, that kind of thing. Well, I haven't had that problem. So, is what it is. I try these brands out, and if they're working for me, then I use them. Working with a vintage bike, you inevitably will come across bolts that you want to replace, or it's missing or something. Missing bolt. So what do I do about a missing bolt? Which bolts is supposed to go in there? You can go to that parts breakout from the manufacturer, and oftentimes the description will just say bolt and have a part number. Okay, so then search the part number, and some other source may tell you more about that bolt. Or you can just simply have two simple tools. A caliper, if you're doing a build project, you got to have one of these anyway. So get one, and then just keep it in millimeters for metric bikes like mine. Measure the outside of it. This is measuring 4.87 millimeters. Well, that's a 5 millimeter bolt. So you need to know the diameter. Then you also need to know the length. Well, that's easy enough to figure out. Boom. This is a 19.95. Well, it's a 20 millimeter length. So far I've got a 5 millimeter by 20 millimeter. The last thing that matters is thread pitch. So get one of these thread pitch gauges. I think I paid $1 for this off of eBay, and yes, it came directly from China, and it took a long time to get here. But now I can match up that thread, and I know that I have a 0.8 thread pitch. Boom, I know exactly what bolt I need, and it was just that easy. Now I can order it from anywhere. And this, I would tend to get just a bag of these things in stainless steel from eBay. And I've mentioned it many times in this video, the service manual. This you have to have. When you're doing a build project, it becomes your religious text. And where do you get those for vintage bikes? Okay, well, the public library sometimes has these things. That's the old school way to go get them. They're getting out of that game since the internet, though. But old vintage bikes, some of these libraries still have these things on the shelf. So that's an option. And then, of course, you go to the internet, you find that there is a chat forum group for your bike, and there is for every bike out there. Somebody has taken it upon themselves, and God bless these people, to just kind of make it their life mission to provide this information. In the case of the Suzuki GS, you have the gsresources.com is kind of the central hub of the whole community of GS owners, and anybody that owns a GS knows about it. If you don't and you're working on one, go there. And through that, I learned of a guy who calls himself Bike Cliff, and this guy has a website with wiring diagrams, procedural documents on how to rebuild VM22 Mikuni carb sets, or the other Mikuni set that comes on some of these later model GS's. And then of course the service manuals, and they're all there to download as PDFs for nothing. There's always somebody that has a site like that out there. Do your research, find it. For the GS, it's definitely the GS Resources and Bike Cliff. I'll put a link up to both of them right here and here. So I think that's about it. I mean, of course there's all kinds of researching challenges that I came across in the course of building a bike. When you break it down to its smallest component and build it back up again, you got to get creative with how you find parts sometimes. Like in the case of these contact points where I had to get my Dremel out and modify the little positioning slots to get the thing to turn right so I could get the gap correct. There's always situations like that, but don't be afraid to follow the little breadcrumb trail when you're dealing with kind of those top tier resources. So boom, the manufacturer's parts breakout, start there. Got my part number, got my description. Then the next level would be your eBay and Amazon, or Google maybe. And from there, then the breadcrumb will be, well, who is the seller name? Okay, maybe I'll Google just that seller name. Keep going deeper until you find your way to these resources that Cruise and Image, to me, I'll be buying stuff from them for years to come now, because I found them and they've just been great to work with. So I hope you found this helpful. There's some information on how I found parts and why I built this bike the way I did in Creating Mr. Corton, available on Amazon. The link is in the description below, or you'll find it on urbanmonktv.com. Hey, come to the premiere. It's a free online event on my YouTube channel here on May 23rd at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, for the premiere of my short film, Me and Mr. Corton. It's got some stunning footage of riding the bike out in the California desert here, and just a fun little story, all done by me, by myself, because it's been COVID lockdown, so I can't really work with anybody else. And but I hope you enjoy. It was a lot of fun to make. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to become an urban monk. Thanks for watching.